Hello, and welcome to the May edition of the Cinetopia radio show and podcast. I'm Amanda, your host. On this month's episode, we review 4 new release films. The Eight Mountains, directed by Felix van Groningen and Charlotte van der Meesch, currently out in cinemas. Plan 75, directed by Chia Hayakawa, a Japanese film also out in cinemas at the moment. Then Master Gardener, Paul Schrader's next film, out on the 26th of May. Finally, Brainwashed, Sex, Camera, Power, a film by Nina Menkes. Stay tuned. So we're here with some of our regulars. Claire, it's been a while, but good to have you back.
I feel like my appearances are all the more sporadic, but make a dramatic re-entrance, which is what I'm doing today. Hello, everyone.
And we're back with Gary as well. So Gary is back this month as well. How are you, Gary?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me back. Yeah, I think I missed a month last month. So yeah, good to be back.
Great. And just a reminder that Cinetopia is working very hard on its outdoor film screening for the end of May. So that's in a week and a half from when this airs. Then we'll be up in Banff and Portsoy, 2 really gorgeous towns in Aberdeenshire, in the northeast coast of Scotland, celebrating the 40th anniversary of the film Local Hero, which was filmed in the area alongside other places. And we're actually bringing some of the cast and crew up as well, and showing a whole bunch of other films, such as a few documentaries, The Oil Machine, which we reviewed on the show here, Ride the Wave, which had a big tour around the UK and Scotland last year, but all fitting for the themes and the locations. We're showing all these films right alongside the beach. So it'll be a really, really wonderful event. If you can get up there, do, or tell your friends who live in the area. And it's at cinescapes.co.uk. And that is our Local Hero Weekender. All right, so the first film we're going to review is The Eight Mountains. And Clara, you went and saw that the other day. It's currently out in the UK cinemas. Tell us a little bit about this film.
Yeah, so I went and viewed The Eight Mountains at the Cameo at a Discover screening. And it was very well attended, which is always nice to see, and full of a good mix of young and old, sort of outdoorsy type people, which is quite comforting. I'm still enjoying being back in the cinema, even though it's been like a couple of years. I'm still feeling a renewed sense of happiness when I'm just in the cinema experiencing things with people. So yeah, it was lovely. But anyway, The Eight Mountains. So the film follows the intertwining and tumultuous fates and friendships of 2 boys growing up in an old Italian village in the mountains. It's vast, it's epic, and it's delicate but raw at the same time. And it's a meditation on love and the indelible mark that the people and places close to us have on the trajectory and riches of our lives. It was created by Belgian filmmakers Felix van Groningen and Charlotte van der Meesch, adapted from the award-winning novel by Italian author Paolo Cognetti. It's, as I say, it's a very vast film. So the story begins in 1984 with the kindling of a really unlikely but seemingly inevitable deep friendship between 2 boys, Pietro, a middle-class boy from Turin, and Bruno from a long line of mountain men, or Montanaros, who age 12 is caring for cattle and running wild in the forests and valleys of northern Italy. As the population of the mountain towns dwindles dangerously close to extinction, these 2 boys' families just remain connected to the town, and then they end up spending summers together and just growing increasingly close, as if they're the last 2 boys on Earth rather than just in the village. And they form a really fast bond that only children it seems can that fast. And then the film subsequently follows the 2 boys as they become men, Pietro becoming estranged from his father in the mountain town where he and Bruno once spent their summers, and Bruno becoming entrenched in the rural farming life handed down to him by his distant and alcoholic father. So the 2 are brought together again later in life and bond again over the restoration of a dilapidated cabin high in the mountains, which Bruno had promised Pietro's father he would do, the 2 having grown close, Bruno becoming a surrogate son almost. So it's a very epic film which masterfully handles transcendentalist cosmic subjects like the cyclical nature of time, life, creation, and death, but it weaves them into the incredibly convincing and captivating relationship and lives of these two people it follows. And it doesn't ever veer into anything kind of trite or mawkish, or never goes into sort of tree of life territory. It manages to weave these concepts in very subtly into a very adventure-laden film, which I enjoyed very much. So yeah, it manages to capture these great high concepts without ever being tedious or trite or mawkish or pretentious. And the vast scale of it is very impressive. So covering not just one, but 2 or 3 lives that are connected and then fractured and then sutured and then celebrated all over again for boyhood to the end of their lives is just kind of miraculous. Yeah, I could go on, shall I?
You put it very brilliantly and eloquently, Clara. But you've covered it very well. I can kind of reiterate some of your points. I watched this one at home, and I kind of wish that I've still got the chance to see it on the big screen, and I think I'd be tempted to do that because of the vastness and the epic scale of it, because it's 2.5 hours long, and it manages to feel kind of grandiose. It's told on a big scale. It's got big themes, but then it's also quite an intimate story between these 2 boys who grow to be really good friends. And yeah, I was just engrossed in their story throughout. It feels like it doesn't feel like almost 3-hour movie. I think it's beautifully shot. It's poetic, the way that the story kind of changes, and it subverts expectations a little bit as it moves through the story. Yeah, there's some I liked how it toys with that idea of when you're a kid, things might seem bigger and more expansive, and then as you become older, there's a scene where they return to a lake where they had been as kids, and they say, one of them, I think it's Pietro, mentions that he remembers it being a lot bigger. And I think it's interesting at how it plays with that thing of Bruno being a man of the mountain and Pietro being a man of the world, that he kind of goes away to far off places and returns back. So it's that idea of scale and the borders that you can place on your own life. I found that aspect of it really interesting. What did you think about it, Amanda?
I liked it. I liked it a lot. I think I agree with you, Gary, that it would have probably been a film to see in the theater. And I think quite a friends of mine who probably went to the same screening as you did, Clara, or around that time, said that was, if you get a chance, please go and check it out in the theater, which I didn't. I saw it at home as well. But I think I might have liked it less than the two of you. Not that I disliked it. And I think it's one of these films that is probably going to be quite popular, and it's probably going to be quite popular with a fairly broad audience, because it's quite emotional in a lot of places. It's very beautiful. It's stunning, just for the landscapes alone, and the cinematography and everything. It's an exceptional film. I think it just was a little light for me on plot and story,
Brutal.
Just it was. And I mean, it's fine. The pacing was fine for me. It didn't bother me that it was that long. I often critique the long, Scorsese Netflix films and whatnot. But that didn't bother me either. I just didn't, I felt it was slightly light, if that's fair.
I have so much to say about the opposite, how I thought it had a lot of depth, because I was I think I do, in my defense, I think I've come to, it came to me a very strange time in my life. I think it sort of hit home because it deals with the pressures and aspirations and mythologies through which people create relationships in their lives, and how your fate is sort of sealed, and also the sublimeness and actually comforting harsh neutrality of nature. And I'm sort of thinking about my life and thinking about just going off into the wild for a long time. So I think that might be why there's a connection. But it's just, and also the fact that it considers where and who and when we begin to age, and ponder our existence, what we're drawn back to, and the sort of elemental things that form us as complex people. And it's about evolution as well. So I'm kind of, I guess maybe that's why it's talking to me at this moment in time. But also I think I like it because, because it has a sort of a broader scope, sort of looking at the rest of the world and different spiritualities and religions, and it kind of takes them into account subtly, which I like. So yeah, the title doesn't refer to any mountain chain in Italy. It refers to the Himalayan mountain chain, which is important because those mountains have a really deep religious significance in both Jainism, Buddhism, Sikhism, and Hinduism. And the film sort of deals with a lot of those existential concepts raised by those faiths. And then also the mountains, the Italian mountains, become sort of a religious, take on a religious element tinge to them, because they're so formative. But yeah, I like that element to it. But yeah, it deals with death and life, Amanda. How could you say it's light? I mean, there's so much going. I don't get that. So much going. But yeah, I do think if I'd seen it a different year or a different month, I might be less impressed. But yeah, for the cinematography itself, I would say go to the cinema and watch it, because people were in awe as they left, just having been transported for a couple of hours. So
yeah, and I also like the aspect ratio as well, which again, I don't know, how it depends on how it's screened and in what case, but the 4:3, aspect ratio, I think really like oftentimes you think of it as it's a film about mountains should be very widescreen, but like I think it actually had a very great impact. I can imagine in the cinema that it would have a great impact as well with the 4:3 aspect ratio. So again, positive things overall, just wasn't my most favorite film, but
and it critiques machismo and like being a radical libertarian traditionalist, which I enjoyed as well. So just good lessons to be learned.
I also just want to give a quick mention to the soundtrack as well. I enjoyed the songs that were peppered throughout it by, I looked it up, it's a Swedish singer-songwriter called Daniel Norgren. So I'd be quite interested to have a look at, check out some of his work, and I think it's his latest album that's kind of being used as the soundtrack. I think I'm definitely leaning towards your feelings on it, Clara, more than Amanda's. I think it also says something along something to say about like friendship as a theme, and like trying to like how a friendship changes through your life, and like the importance of like adult friendships, and how you can like be apart from a friend for a long time and then pick up that dynamic where you left it off again, because there's, without going into too much, there's parts of Bruno and Pietro's lives where they don't see each other very often, and I think that's interesting. It's kind of like I suppose it's like a bit of a antidote to like the kind of toxic masculinity friendship of Banshees of Inisherin, which also had like lots of vast landscapes, and how that kind of looked at looked at a friendship between two men in a very different way. So it kind of like made me think of that. But I think this one is it's a lot lighter, but not in a bad way of being light. A film also reminded me of a little bit. It's a bit of a throwback, and it's probably not one that would be easily compared with it. Was The Place Beyond the Pines? It's a film from about 10 years ago with Ryan Gosling and Bradley Cooper, and it was all about fathers and sons and how the decisions of the fathers run through into the sons' lives, and kind of like I think the film does something quite interesting with that as well.
Yeah, definitely the parenthood element is, parenthood tying into the cyclical nature of life and that we're constantly just one begets the other, and things just have an avalanche kind of impact, like a ripple. It just beautifully packages up the relationships between the parent and child because of its vastness and in terms of scale and time and space, and how the relationships with one's parents inevitably just impact the life of the children that you raise, for better or for worse. And it just lays bare how nurturing a deep and meaningful relationship with a friend or with your father or other can make life either beautiful and rich, or make it empty and painful and full of yearning. I always think it's a good reminder to have. And as I say, it's not trite or mawkish. And I'm a very skeptical person, so for what that's worth, I would say go see it.
I also would disagree with you, Gary. Although I did really like, I liked the music, as in I would like to maybe listen to the music, but I didn't like it in the film. Maybe it's like I know a Swedish folk singer, but singing in English, and some of the lyrics as they were coming in just felt like too on point, like too literal. And it drove me nuts. So I was starting to like Shazam it a little bit, because obviously you'll probably hear it in the, the radio version of this. And then it gets to like when he starts to sing and I'm like, oh, come on. So maybe that also is one aspect that was like pulling me out a bit. Yeah, I mean, better than Banshees though. Everyone knows I was like the only person who didn't love Banshees. Better than Banshees, but just not my most favorite film.
Controversy left, right, and center.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You gotta have one dissenting vote sometimes, on the big hits. All right, but that is the 8 Mountains.
Oh, I had a note, but this is kind of I scrawled in my notebook, it says, at times gave straight alpinists Brokeback Mountain.
Well, yeah. There was a Brokeback Mountain element to this. I also there was
Platonic Brokeback Mountain.
Yeah.
And then also I felt like this Italian miniseries called The Best of Youth I saw that I loved. Like there was elements of just this episodic sort of covering boyhood a bit, I mean, there's lots of different things I connected with that reminded me of the films I'd seen before. So maybe then I was just waiting for it to become its own. But I think most certainly you two really like it. I know quite a lot of people who loved it. It's a gorgeous film. It's worth seeing in the cinema as well. And it's The 8 Mountains, and it's out in the UK. So check it out. So our next film we're going to review, also currently out in cinemas right now in the UK and beyond. It's also on Curzon Home. It's Plan 75. And Clara, tell us about that film.
Sure. So Plan 75 is set against the real sociological context of Japan's burgeoning negative population. The film imagines a culture where resentment for the elderly has ruptured into increasingly common acts of terrorism and violence against them. The government then passes a bill named Plan 75, a program which allows even incentivizes citizens over 75 to sign up for voluntary suicide, pushing the film safely into very dark dystopian territory. Although, as director Chi Hayakawa has stated, it's too real to be sci-fi, which is interesting. I was discussing this in the pub the other night with a couple of people about the line between sci-fi and dystopia and satire, basically. And this definitely sits on that sort of uncomfortable, sort of uncanny valley, where it's very much real and very much possible, and maybe even here. So in reality, as I say, Japan is suffering both economically and sociopolitically from its being a world leader with regards to life expectancy, with women living to like 87 and men to like 80, and having low birth rates and its reluctance to allow easy channels for immigration and such, among other economic reasons. It's such a bad problem that the Prime Minister, Fumio Kishida, said in 2021, he publicly called Japan's aging population and low birth rate an urgent threat to Japan's future, going so far as to say earlier this year the country just won't be able to function in the coming decades. So it's really a doomsday situation in the eyes of a lot of Japanese people and the government. He's also commissioned reports addressing the economic impact or shrinkonomics at play in Japan. And he's promised government intervention into the issue, pledging to create a government agency to tackle the problem. So against this really real context and the wider global context of assisted dying being legalized through certain legal channels, like in Switzerland with Dignitas, the premise doesn't really seem too far-fetched. And when I initially looked up Plan 75 on Google, the top suggested search was, is Plan 75 a real thing? So it seems pretty plausible to people. But the Japanese Prime Minister said that he'll be focusing more on policies regarding children and child rearing rather than killing off the elderly, which in my mind is kind of as ripe a source of dystopian horror, if not more so, than the film, really. But yeah, so the director, as I say, Chi Hayakawa, cites increasing pressure from the media and government to be self-sufficient and eschew welfare as an inspiration for the film, saying that there's that those two pillars are manufacturing a sense of, quote, shame amongst those who need welfare, meaning those who need it don't apply for it, which makes their lives even more desperate. But it also infects the younger generations, building up a huge resentment towards all older people. She goes on to say, it means that we have to take care of ourselves instead of relying on the government or being a burden to society. And it's created a kind of hatred towards the elderly and the weak. And that's where the film picks off. So the main character, Michi Kakutani, the 78-year-old woman played by Chieko Baisho, who's at the heart of the film, she embodies this desperation as we see her caught in this social bear trap of not wanting to be a burden to society or people around her that she's formed relationships with, but desperately wanting to survive and to live. The film ends up being as much about the harsh realities of aging and surviving as an increasingly marginalized and undervalued and lonely person as it is about the dystopian possibilities and creeping horror that it deals with. It deals with a lot of moral quandaries, which inevitably rear their head as people working within the government system, helping to run the program, question their ethics and the value of the people they interact with. It ends up being very tender, though, I think, and just sort of addresses loneliness and the poor quality of life among the elderly and the lack of community connection, rather than exclusively and intensely dealing with the horror of mass state-sponsored suicide, although there is obviously a touch of that going on.
Yeah, I think
Oh no, sorry, I was just gonna say I was listening to something the other day that was kind of along the lines of the same idea that you were talking about, Clara, where things are like not quite sci-fi, but they're like blending the line between sci-fi and dystopia. And the person on the podcast I was listening to described something else, not this, but this applies as a near-fi, which I quite like that as a genre, as a subgenre maybe, and I think that definitely applies to this film, because it kind of, like, when you read the synopsis, you think it's going to be a kind of Black Mirror, like utopia type of thing, but then, like you see, it that is a lot more understated and it's a lot more tender. But I actually think, go back to what Amanda said about Eight Mountains, I kind of felt like this one was maybe too light.
Agree.
This feels so. I know that it's based on a short. I think it began as a short that was part of a bigger film in 2018 that was like a collection of short films, and then this was a segment of it that's been expanded now into a feature. And I just think that maybe that there's not quite enough meat on the bones to like flesh it out into a feature. And it's not to say that there couldn't be. I think it's an interesting premise, but I just felt like it's a little bit too ponderous in places, and I was struggling to be invested. I think the character of Mishi is the strongest part of the film. I think the guy who was working for Plan 75, and then like the Filipino character, I was just struggling to become engaged in their stories, and I don't know, it just wasn't. It got to the stage I was looked at my watch far too many times for a film that was under 2 hours. It's not to say that like I hated it. I think it was an interesting idea and it was well made. But yeah, I don't know, Amanda, what did you think of this?
Well, yeah, and I like your near-fi. I think what made this film work is the way it was shot, the tone, the fact that it felt real, and yet it was quite scary and dystopian. And like, I mean, the premise was it does not, doesn't exist, thank goodness. And I think it's specifically what you said, Clara, around the around this sort of creating the like a real life sort of depiction of what it is to be an older person, the social isolation that one feels, the sort of the issues of employment and and all of these sort of things that come through. I think that was really powerful, and lots of different parts of this film. I do agree with you both that it was slow. And I mean, I thought Eight Mountains was as well, or light. But I do think the main character, Michi, was by far my favorite. I was really rooting for that character throughout the whole thing, and was really powerful. I thought really well acted, really interesting. I think conceptually, I think it's a really interesting and important film, and something to talk about in terms of the way the bureaucratic sort of way of, dealing with, these kinds of things, as you were saying, that, people are saying, oh, this, population thing is a crisis and whatnot. And I thought I brought up stuff that was very, very depressing. It wasn't an easy film to watch. It was quite, it was quite heart-wrenching. But it was, it was an interesting film. And I think the way it was filmed and the way that the director took the film, like the topic and the idea around something sci-fi and shot it that in that very sort of realistic observational way was very interesting. But I do agree with you both. It was it dragged a bit and quite a few places.
I think it can have been as it's interesting that it came from a short film. I didn't know that doesn't make a lot of sense. It does feel like they sort of came up with a couple of extra characters to flesh out the timeline, but it would have been stronger probably if it just stuck with that one character of the older lady who was more captivating. But I think it's one of those films for me that at the time, it did drag a little bit, but then it had a really good payoff at the end. And then also one of those films that in hindsight, the more I thought about it, the more I think I've got from it in reflection. So in the sense that I didn't feel like it was heavy-handed enough with pushing the limits of the potential of the dystopian themes brought up. When I've considered it in depth, where I think the real kind of dystopian horror lies is that it is sort of an imperceptive clinical and bureaucratic handling of the program, and the disconnect and the distance engendered by the technology and the bureaucracy and the corporate procedure, which is so normal to us, and so that it does just pass over, and it does seem like boring to actually watch it play out. And even when the government is saying, in the film, the government expresses through disembodied like radio announcements and TV appearances that the program is a great success, and they explained how they couch it in terms of yen profit, and that kind of slips by you. But then obviously that's very chilling and very realistic. But I find it really interesting as well that it raises some really salient and, as I say, more subtle in hindsight, chilling questions about modern society's ability to deal with death and face it head on, and our inability to invite it into our homes and discussions with any reverence or due diligence and sort of respect, and our proclivity to outsource dealing with it. And we'd much rather detach and distance ourselves from it as much as possible and leave it to the government or a faceless organization if that's possible. And I think that in hindsight is the subtle power and the melancholy of the film, is that it shows the really slow and subtle realizations which can wash over you as you realize that you are detached ethically and physically from all these things happening around you, as the cool sort of clinical Dramamine drip of authoritarianism and dystopia creep in. But does it, so I think it's one of those sort of like a slow burner for me, which has had more of an impact on me than I initially realized, as I'm just realizing.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that same. I just took it in. So but I feel the same thing will happen, and I'll feel the resonance in this film more and longer than I will with the previous film we talked about, in terms of aging and and cycles of life and whatnot. And yeah, I think it's made me think a lot about various things as well. And I think it's a very accomplished film. That I definitely think it's an accomplished film. I do think we've said our little caveats about maybe places to improve.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And it does actually make me want to watch the other short films that were part of the film that this was based on. So the film was called 10 Years Japan, which 5 filmmakers creating a vision of how they might see Japan in 10 years' time. And I think I'll be honest, I don't know that much. I've not seen lots of Japanese cinema, and I don't know loads about Japanese culture, but there's enough in this film that it kind of like intrigues me into like the idea that, I don't know, I was reading that like how older people could see taking the money and dying as being like service to their country in a kind of sacrificial way. And I think that's quite an interesting idea. So it's definitely it's piqued my interest, and I'm interested to check out the rest of those films.
Great. So we can check out that. I think sometimes that's on Mubi. I was just checking out, and also check out Plan 75 if you'd like. It's in the cinemas right now. Master Gardener. Ready for this one?
Let's.
Gary, you got this one?
Yeah, I think so. So, okay, so Master Gardener is the latest film from the writer and director Paul Schrader. It stars Joel Edgerton, who plays a gardener called Narvel Roth, and he works at a estate in Louisiana for his boss, played by Sigourney Weaver, who's called Mrs. Haverhill, and he's very dedicated to his work and his craft. He's very meticulous about creating the displays and making this pristine estate to keep on top of his work. Things change when his boss's niece comes to stay, and she asks Narvel to take her niece on as his apprentice. And he develops a friendship with the niece, and things develop from there. So that's the synopsis. And I know that like Paul Schrader, this is seen as being the third and final film from like this kind of contemporary trilogy of like male redemption. So I don't know if listeners might have watched First Reformed with Ethan Hawke, and then there was one a couple of years ago called The Card Counter with Oscar Isaac. So this is kind of like the third piece in that trilogy, and it's, I think, for people who like Paul Schrader films, and I do, and I get a sense that I might be in the minority, but I do like Paul Schrader's films, and this one isn't really going to win people over to the way that he tells his stories, because he has been telling similar stories throughout his whole career, even going back to Taxi Driver, which he wrote in the 70s, and there's always a theme of redemption, or like they would call his protagonists like God's lonely men. So I'm interested to hear what you guys think about the film.
Clara.
Right. I mean, I can't swear. I still can't swear, can I?
Ideally, no.
Okay, well, what the fudge was this movie? What the good actors can make bad movies. We need to remember this time and time again, that just because you have a really excellent actor does not mean you're guaranteed to have a really brilliant film. I just felt like as I was watching it, I feel like I was watching Sigourney Weaver's first audition reel following like a bad fall. And she just like, which has just eradicated her life's acting experience completely. And I'm like, sorry to say it, but it just was like absolutely, it was really baffling. As I was watching it, I just thought like ChatGPT wrote the script. ChatGPT has written the script, not Paul Schrader. This is someone else. He's an imposter. It felt absolutely baffling. To quote, "I thought you had a green thumb. I didn't know it was a green middle finger."
That was an interesting quote. Yes.
To be fair, it made me laugh, but at it and bitterly, because I was resentful that I was watching it. That's how it made me feel. Like, honestly, if it was like, yeah, if ChatGPT crossed with American History X and then crossed with Gardener's World and also a generic porno, if that was the input search that you put into ChatGPT, that was what script you would get out, is this movie.
The quote that I've got written down here is that he said that seeds of love grow like the seeds of hate, which I think is speaks to like the
Deep
of the character. Yeah, and I'll admit, like, it's definitely not like subtlety is not Paul Schrader's strong suit, and it hasn't been for a while. But I don't know. I think that there's some. I like the film, but I know that that his films are an acquired taste. I don't know. I know that like you can have a good performance in a film that like might not be a great film. I thought Joel Edgerton was really good in this. He's interesting, like that is kind of like brooding protagonist, and he kind of, it's almost like I don't know, he's like the new mold for like a Paul Schrader protagonist, and I don't know, there's only slight differences from each. What, like if you look back at like this trilogy as such. So he is kind of like doubling down, or in this case, tripling down on the same themes. And yeah, I think if you've seen either of the other two and not liked them, then I would say don't watch this one. But if you did like those ones, then it's more of the same.
I've not seen those latest two. But I have of course seen, his previous earlier work, and I am quite obsessed. And we'll put a big shout out for You Must Remember This podcast that goes through the history of Hollywood, but like largely from a female perspective. And there's this whole series she does on erotic 80s, which brings up Schrader a lot. So I'm fascinated to go back in the history of like this, director's work and, writer's work. I think this film is, I could not believe what I was watching. I was shocked that person's name was attached to this, and also just the complete concept of taking these really big subject matters in terms of like race and
class and power and
all of these
drugs and social issues.
Like, and I mean, it made, what was the film that won the Oscar a few years ago that everyone was like, I can't believe that won, and made that look like positively like amazing compared to this. Like it was
Green Book.
This was so, it was just so trite, so terrible. Taking on these subjects and the way that it ends as well along that side.
It was actually offensive. It was actually offensive. It's actually fully offensive to Black Americans, to Black people all over the world, to women as well. Throw them in as well. Like it's just absolutely horrible. So yeah, I know Paul Schrader, like he has, like that's his thing. Everyone defends him and says, well, look, it's a Paul Schrader film. It's like, of course, yeah, he is retracing well-hewn subjects, introverted and troubled male loners on the fringes, struggling to harness their demons and function in society, which is fertile territory. And it could have been a very good starting point to deal with the issues of racism, which are brought up in this film. But all that happened was a baffling transition, or three, between a bunch of characters sort of muddling their way through things with completely incomprehensible speech, but completely unconvincing, and then like an almost inevitable but still absolutely confusing veering into just like random violence just to finish it off, as if like the last bit of the movie just needed something to spice it up because it was so agonizingly terrible to begin with. Or like, just let's start shooting people. Like, and how is that redemptive? How is that a redemption arc that this man decides to go and just shoot up a room full of people whose backgrounds we know nothing about? In the modern narrative of drug addiction, shooting up people who are high on drugs is not like a good guy, bad guy kind of classic arc narrative. It was so reductive. Like I'm actually kind of angry thinking about it, to be honest, because the subject in America of the alt-right, of Nazism, of racism is hot, and it is real, and it is complicated, and to do it like this, it felt pornographic. It really did. It felt just so completely just flippant, and I really can't stress enough how it seemed like ChatGPT wrote this, because just like smashing together just like a man with a checkered racist past, and then just making him a gardener, and then suddenly throwing him back into that world again just seems so completely random, and it just wasn't explained. None of it was fleshed out. None of it made sense.
I mean, it was offensive. I agree. I think I completely agree. I think from the very beginning at that point, but it was also really bad. It was bad. It was a bad film. I mean, the narration was like corny.
That's hilarious.
As anything. It didn't make much sense, and I didn't really buy the like affection from any of the characters.
Also, did she look like anything like a person who is on drugs or in withdrawal? Like, what kind of person is on withdrawal is just like goes straight into like a 9-to-5 gardening job and is chirpy and is fine, and then suddenly it's like, oh, a couple of scenes later it's like, oh, she's actively using and she's a drug that there was no this is a sober actress, and you can see it. Like, it's not, there was no effort to make any of these characters actually believable. So there was a bizarre scene where Norval, the gardener, decides to rock up to his new ingenue slash romantic interests neighborhood to try and like noise up some drug dealers that are giving her hassle. And then he gets out of the car in his gardening overalls with pruning shears and just struts over to these guys who are just standing on the street corner. And then he just starts threatening them with these pruning shears, snipping them in front of their face, like with this smug look on his face. And these guys who are allegedly hardened criminals just stand there looking a bit baffled, and also just unconvincingly, they don't look like any kind of real person that would be in this scenario. And then as Norval turns around to go, really proud of himself, swaggering off back to his car, point made, these two random guys just shout, "Hey, chill, proud boy," as if they've just like, how would they know that? How is this man giving off any kind of alt-right signals? There's nothing to go on but that. It was honestly just absolutely baffling. Just made no sense, completely detached from reality, but not in a fun way, and was just like aching to be gritty and to be bitter and to be edgy, but it just was like a sour glass of milk. It was just, sorry, I'm gonna hate listening back to me like ranting about this because I'm completely off piste.
No, one needs.
God, those diary entries though, those supposedly profound musings, they were just completely lacking in any kind of tangible profundity or sense of insight into his past, into his character, into his actual motivations, or any kind of, oh God. I mean, maybe you should all watch it. Maybe you should watch it, but like for free if you can. And then just enjoy the
I'm not sure you have to watch it. I think I could have gone with never watching that film ever and been a lot happier of a person.
It's one of those things where you're like, I'm never going to get that time back. And I've watched a lot of films and I don't really feel like that, even though still love the really poor ones.
It's definitely one of the worst films I've seen in probably the last 3 to 4 years. I can't. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure we can go back in this show, and there was one that I felt was similarly bad, but it's hard for me to come to that right now.
I'm sorry. In what universe is it like is it a brilliant, cathartic, looking to a future of America where racism is history and we all live happily ever after? How did he jump from the chaos of the beginning to the movie to this idyllic dream end by shooting up a room of people? That was the only narrative device that was employed to change that situation, apart from the unconvincing romantic relationship. And it was bad. It's absolutely confusing. No spoiler alerts, but just the ending. Oh, sorry. It was just like, how did that get resolved? Like, how did this happen? It's just jumped into. Now it's perfect. Now we've done it. We've solved racism.
Solved it. Yeah, tick it off. Yeah. I don't know if I can add to that. I can. Sorry. Yeah. No, it's all right.
So the final film we're going to review is Brainwashed, Sex, Camera, Power. Gary, you saw this film. I saw it when it was at Berlinale, and we're considering possibly screening it as part of our doc program. But Gary, do you want to give us a little overview of the film?
Yes. So it's a documentary directed by Nina Menkes, and it looks at the history of film and how female characters are portrayed throughout film, and it kind of joins the dots between employment discrimination and like exploitation of women and the objectification of women, and it discusses that through in a kind of like a TED Talk structure with like some talking heads and some film clips. And it kind of like charts right back from, I think, the first film clips from 1896 through to pretty recent ones like Hustlers from like just a couple of years ago, and it gets into like the technical aspects of it. So it's kind of plays a bit like a film theory, film criticism lecture in terms of like, it looks at composition and it looks at lighting, and it kind of like illustrates its points through small clips of films. And I found it interesting, especially when it got into like the technical aspects of it. And there's some interesting points there on like slow motion. There's a section on slow motion where they're talking about like if there's slow motion used for a male character, generally it's like a sports sequence, or like an action sequence, and there's like the male character is like doing something, whereas like a slow-mo sequence with a female character is like sexualizing the female character and objectifying them, and it kind of like looks at that, looks at the juxtaposition between those two ideas. Yeah, I liked it from a like educational and insightful, and like I think the use of the clips ties in well with the points that it makes. I think that maybe it's a little like it's big on information and it's a little light on like analysis for me. Like I think it takes us on like a whistle stop tour with like a lot of clips and a lot of ideas. But I don't know whether it really answers any of the questions that it raises.
Yeah, I think it's good to note that its basic thesis is on a Laura Mulvey, really famous sort of academic piece, Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema, which is really around this idea that Laura coined, the male gaze. And
Yes.
I think this film, more than anything I have ever seen, really kind of with all the clips, as you mentioned, brings that into more of a public screening kind of light, and make, it's not less of an academic thing. And I'm gonna probably keep myself. I feel like I've been quite negative on almost all these films today, and I'll be quite tame on any sort of critique on this in the aspect that I often don't like films that are TED Talks and things like Inconvenient Truth and whatnot. While the subject matter of something like Inconvenient Truth is very informative and helpful and useful to learn, or especially at the time that it came out, the manner in which it was done, or the term documentary, like, we talked a lot around that sort of thing. So I would much prefer to see a Nina Menkes film. There's quite a lot of films that Nina's done that are incredible, and I think bringing this conversation to light is very important. So it was something that we had thought about showing, and I would consider still showing, to sort of create a whole conversation around with other films. And so I think bringing these subject matters up is useful. I do kind of agree with you that it's a very complex subject, and it's very hard in a film like this to discuss something that complex without simplifying it a bit too much. But in that same way, is it still worth that coming out to a little, like bringing this up in a way that people maybe didn't think about? And I didn't even think about, like, I'm looking at Sofia Coppola's films, obviously female director, but Nina's using this in her talk to very clearly describe the way women are presented, the way a cinematographer that's a male would film a woman versus others, and how that's just coded in everything we see. And it's really enlightening when you visually see it, and it's a little bit like, I would almost say, like a TED Talk mixed with like a video essay, and it's very useful, but
Yeah.
top documentary, will it win best film ever made? No, probably not.
Yeah, I think it's important that, like you say, like it kind of jumps off from from Laura Mulvey's piece on the male gaze, and it kind of by contextualizing it in terms of like these film clips, it makes it a lot more, I don't know, I think it like makes it more accessible by presenting it in this video essay type way, and it is eye-opening. There's some moments where it's like the opening scenes of Lost in Translation, just to go back to like mentioning Sofia Coppola, like it kind of shows how the patriarchy is like ingrained in cinema language, and how, yeah, even though there's like many great female filmmakers and there's more females making films today, like some of them like the language is so ingrained in how characters might be introduced. So they've got like the way that Scarlett Johansson's character is introduced is just like her like you don't see her face. All you see is like her bum and her legs, and then like it shows how like Bill Murray's character is introduced. And yeah, I think it definitely is eye-opening film, and it really like yeah, it gets across its yeah, I think it makes it accessible by using the examples it uses, definitely.
Yeah. So the film is Brainwashed, Sex, Camera, and Power. And I believe if you're in the US, I think it's on CCM, and I know the BFI is sharing it as well. So I don't know if it's on BFI Player or whatnot, but I don't think it's in cinemas in Edinburgh, but certainly probably some documentary cinemas.
I think it might be. I think it might be in the Cameo in Edinburgh.
Oh, really?
I don't know how long a run it's had, but yeah, I saw them posting about it this weekend. So, yeah.
All right,
So
great.
some selected UK cinemas as well.
So select UK cinemas. I know because BFI is having that run, and also yeah, probably online as well. So check the film out. It's very interesting. And that wraps up our show this month. So there's a lot about to happen. Cannes upon us. So that means it's a great deal of films to look forward to over the next year or so as they get released. Anything that you all are looking forward to? There's a new Wes Anderson film. There's lots of Wes coming out.
Lots of 2 atomic-based films that I'm looking forward to then. Interesting.
What's the second atomic one?
Well, I'm quite looking forward to Oppenheimer. So like a Christopher, just like settling back into the safe warmth of Christopher Nolan film. Yeah, I'm just really interested in the chemist and physicist Robert J. Oppenheimer, who is known as the father of the atomic bomb generally as a historic figure. Like a man who creates an atomic bomb, watches it go off, and then remarks, he quotes the Bhagavad Gita and says, "Now I become death, the destroyer of worlds." Like, I mean, that's going to be an interesting biography, and it's going to be an ensemble cast, and Cillian Murphy says it's the best script he's read, so for what that's worth, that's intriguing. But yeah, also War Pony. I'm really interested to see that. So it follows the intertwining fates of, again, two male characters. But this time growing up on, I think, a South Dakota reservation. I think it's South Dakota. Yeah, and it's about money and love, and it looks really well made. So yeah.
Yeah, I got a couple of film trips coming up the next 2 nights. So I'm going to see, there's a preview screening of Hypnotic tomorrow, which is Robert Rodriguez's new film. I think it's a bit of a throwback thriller starring Ben Affleck. So that's on tomorrow, and then on Tuesday night there's a preview of Ari Aster's new film with Joaquin Phoenix, Beau is Afraid, which I've seen some very dividing opinions so far on that film. So I'm interested to see what Ari Aster has done, because his work's been pretty impressive so far with Hereditary and Midsummer. So that's the next. But yeah, I'll have some FOMO when seeing everyone at Cannes this upcoming week, but I have seen that the weather forecast is supposed to rain all week, so it'll be a perfect perfect cinema view and weather in the south of France.
Is it raining all week here or raining all week in France?
In France.
Oh,
Whoa.
yeah. So that dulls my jealousy somewhat, at least.
Yes.
No,
not much.
It'll still, I mean, but also they're there to be indoors anyway. I mean, so I'm sure it'll be it seems like a very interesting bunch of films that are coming out. I'm sure certainly we will be reviewing some of those films in the next few episodes that you mentioned as well. So look forward to that. And I'm looking forward to watching the films that we have on and outdoors. Hopefully more sunny moments in the northeast of Scotland than Cannes, with the Local Hero 40th anniversary, which Local Hero is very much favorite of many people. It has a very strong fandom, and I've learned that as well. So yeah, we'll be meeting some of the crew and cast, and we will be actually sharing that on our YouTube as well, the event that we're running around that. Yeah, so join us if you can, cinescapes.co.uk. Gary and Clara, thanks so much for joining us today, and let's see you soon.
Yep. Thanks, Amanda. See you soon.
Thank you. Bye. See ya.